chrome the whole thing down, I want to go in like the tender deck and the inside of the coal bunker. You know, rust would accumulate there just like it would on a hopper. So utilizing, you know, one of my rust colors, flat brown, it could be you know, any variation of rust. I go in very carefully with the airbrush and get the tender deck and the slope sheet on this coal bunker. Next step would be to darken the smoke box, because if you look at a lot of steam engines, the smoke box was a much darker black. You know, some of them, you know, obviously the factory applied paint would be they used paint mixed with linseed oil, I think, that was heat resistant, and you know, that silver coloration that a lot of smoke boxes had was what they maybe initially applied, but over time this actual smoke box would become a very dark, flat black type color. So to distinguish between the smoke box and the remainder of the boiler and other surfaces of the engine, I color the smoke box with flat black in the stack also. Now your running gear, generally that's going to excuse me, be somewhat rusted, so you know, going in and applying your rust coloration to the running gear creates some distinction between the running gear and the remainder of the engine. And then to kind of integrate and unify all this, you can go over what you've done so far with a dilute overspray of grimy black, and that kind of unifies and combines you know, our initial base color, our rust coloration, and the smoke box coloration. And then, you know, kind of a last step is to depict the lime scale that, you know, is going to be coming off the pop-off valves and down into the firebox and going up into the cab, and you know, even coming off the water hatch on the tender, you know, there would be lime scale or overspill that would go down the side of the tender. You know, how detailed you want to get with your weathering, you know, that's a matter of preference, personal preference, what you feel comfortable doing. But in the handout, I gave a set of procedural steps that you can try to follow and practice with. And, you know, what I'm presenting in this discussion is not, you know, a complete step-by-step approach, but for those of you who did get the handout, you know, I'd encourage you to look it over and see if you can apply some of these techniques to your weathering. You know, that's basically what I wanted to present.
What do you use for a sealant after you get done with your chocolate?
I use a lot of Dull Coat. That's one thing I didn't hit on is traditionally I've used Dull Coat, and I pretty much sealed as I go, and I do highlight that in the handout. You know, for each layer or coloration that I'm doing, I'm going to seal that with a misting of Dull Coat. You don't want to get heavy-handed with that stuff at all, because it will, even with acrylic paint, kind of make it disappear, and that's particularly true with the powders. But just by doing a light misting, you'll get some adhesion, or better adhesion, and it will protect those layers that you've done from subsequent layers. But I've been using just like Krylon Artist Matte Fixative, and I think you know, for the money you get a bigger quantity, and I think it's better actually.
Okay, good. That's what I was wondering, because I used the Dull Coat and I just got that Krylon from the Satin Clear.
Yeah, I just bought a new can last night, and I think it's just as, if not more, effective. But you know, weathering for me is the most interesting and attractive part of the hobby. You know, that's the artistic side it really has drawn me in after, you know, being out of the hobby for many years. And if I didn't have that outlet to try to, you know, kind of creatively convey what you see in the prototypes, I don't think I'd be nearly as interested in the hobby. So if you see yourself, you know, being somewhat creative or artistically oriented, really look to weathering as an outlet for that.
And it's also easier than, it's not going to take like scratch filling. Just take days or something. It's like you could probably get something done reasonably quick. It's not like a long project.
Yeah.
Just in my.
Matt, what do you do for the side rods on when you're doing steam engines?
Yeah, I with the base,
Haven't had 'em,
with
like,
the initial,
blood up or anything?
no, I've never had any problems. You know, you will get a little bit of paint on the tread, and just by running the engine and working it back and forth, and maybe using a Q-tip dipped in alcohol paint thinner, you can get that off. But
Do you run the drivers when you're spraying them?
I haven't done that really.
Okay.
You know, just by getting up in there, I'm able to cover everything pretty well, and you know, maybe I'll go back and run it, or I'll go and run it, and then maybe go back and touch them up a little bit. But I've never been afraid to paint the running gear. You know, some people would really want to avoid that, but these engines, they run fine.
You have a booth or you spray outside?
It's spray paint.
Spray booth.
You spray paint it, or is it dry brush? Dry brushing.
All this is done with the airbrush, but I do use the dry brush technique for certain details, and I hit on that a little bit in the article or the handout. But it just takes practice. You know, get yourself some. You know, this car right here. I mean, this is a. I think it's, you know, like basically a Tyco car, you know. So one thing that a lot of people don't understand with model railroading is that it's not detail that creates realism, it's coloration that creates realism. Your mind's eye discerns what's realistic based on color, not detail. So you can have every imaginable grab iron and prototypical exact detail on a model, but it's the coloration that's going to tell you that that's a realistic model. You know, this has no separate details at all, you know, nothing hand applied, but yet it still looks, in my mind anyways, realistic. You know, so, you know, another guy that kind of espouses that belief is Lance Minheim. You're probably familiar with his name in the
Yes.
Model Railroader. And, you know, I've definitely, you know, kind of adopted and accepted that notion that it's coloration, you know, along with the composition of your scenes and you know, just the, you know, those are the key factors in creating realism. So even if you're into operation, there's room for integrating weathering and additional realism into your modeling.
What would you do the same? Would this technique work with the paint bottles you get at Hobby Lobby or something?
You can use any kind of acrylic paint. I mean, the only enamel or solvent-based paint I use is the rattle cans for painting trucks and couplers. Or if like I said, you know, this car started off completely chocolate brown. You know, because number one, it allows me to darken the space between the boards and create that three-dimensionality so that there's more depth. There's kind of a pre-shadowing. You know, there's a shadowing you get along the ladders that you can't achieve any other way. So from going from dark to light, you can create that contrast and more depth to the model. And you know, this car will end up probably similar to that.
Have you ever did the mixture with rubbing alcohol trick? I know there's a trick where you mix rubbing alcohol with the paint.
Yeah, I use that as the solvent, you know, spraying through the brush. I used to use tap water, and alcohol is a much better.
Yeah, the water like spits.
Yeah, it's,
So-
it's too much.
Yeah, I would. It dries quicker too. You know, it's more controllable. So I would definitely use alcohol.
Even with the dry brushing technique, would you use it to make it a little running like a little black coming down from the stack, like for a diesel, like coming off the.
I'd use powders for something like that. I mean, that's more controllable. Well, I appreciate your attention, and yeah.
We had a weathering seminar at Nick's Train Depot years ago. One of the comments that was made was they like to weather with chalk, and the reason why was you take any model you want, and if you don't like what you have, just wash it off. Start over. It doesn't affect anything as long as you have put the fix on there to set it.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and I you know, for me, I haven't, you know, I can't achieve some of the end results that I want simply using chalks. I think use them in combination with other techniques, but chalks, I mean, if you're trying to depict dust, you're trying to do more detailed type weathering, they definitely have their place, and you got to find out what you're comfortable with.
The thing about the chalks, they were cheap and dirty. It didn't take any time to set it up.
Yeah.
I've got an airbrush. At the time it took me to get it all set up and everything, I blow away an hour every time by the time I set it up and then cleaned it.
Yeah, I agree. You know, there are definitely more expedient ways of getting to it than the airbrush, but just, you know, trust me, I've broken a lot of eggs in the process of trying to develop comfortable, reliable techniques. And some of my earlier stuff, I would not want you to see. But
I have some.
you know, you develop a set of techniques that you're comfortable with, that you feel that you can replicate, and that you're going to get the end result. And you know, using a variety of mediums, I think, allows you to, you know, achieve about whatever you want, really.
There was a pretty good article, I mean, time seems to fly, but in Model Railroader, I think, within the last 2 years, on weathering.
2012.
Yeah, something like that. Oh, is it that long ago?
I think it may have been.
But it had some good stuff in there.
Yeah, they normally do like a weathering issue. It seems like the last few years they've had like a issue devoted to weathering.
In
And
fact, it may have been even more than one issue.
Yeah, they had a series.
yeah, I look at weather. That's kind of one of those elusive things that if you know, if you look at probably what I would consider the good modelers, the better modelers, they seem to have a mastery of weathering, and you know, you can be a good modeler without necessarily being a good weatherer, but I think it helps to have that in your repertoire. You know.
How would you take the paint off if you wanted to redo it? What would you use to take it? Would you just strip the whole car, or would you use some?
That's tough. You know, the best thing to do is get yourself a new car, probably.
The one thing I've used, though, I used just the bottle from Hobby Lobby, though. Like a paint that you get, like a crab or something. I'm also O gauge, so I take rubbing alcohol and just a little towel and just rub and use. It comes off really good. That's just how I do it. I just took a whole engine. My first engine I did, I'm gonna redo it. I didn't like the weathering job. I just cleaned it off 2 days ago.
Yeah, you gotta practice. And
Yeah, it is. And also, some people say go up, some people go down. I would say go up. when you say go up on like just the web, just if you're just doing like little gray spots like going up like from the track,
You always go down.
always go down.
That's the number.
Alright.